The reality is lots of people don't have to think twice. They go to a buffet, they get what they want, they eat, whatever. Many people with ADD do. We have to have a plan. We have to be effortful. And I know that my body will work with me if I'm treating it well, and it could totally work against me if I'm not treating it well. And really, the key is just being mindful of what you're eating.
ADHD Rewired, episode 74. This is the show designed to help those of us who have really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. My name is Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, coach, and consultant. We know that starting can be the hardest part, so let's get started. But first, let me thank our sponsors. This podcast is brought to you by ADHD Rewired Coaching and Accountability Groups. To find out about the next ADHD Rewired Coaching and Accountability Group, go to coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. I want to welcome back to ADHD Rewired my friend Roberto Olivardia. Let's call him, do you have your patients call you Dr. Roberto or...
They either call me Dr. Olivardia, Dr. O, or Roberto.
Okay.
I actually have one patient that calls me Dr. Roberto. So any of those, I really have no preference. So I just tell people not to call me Bob. Like that's basically
no Bob. All right, no Bob.
Yeah.
All right. So you heard Roberto on an episode that we talked a lot about sleep. I wish I could tell you what number it was, but I didn't do my homework, and so you can go back and just find the episode about sleep. Look for Roberto. Roberto is a professor at Harvard, which always has, make you feel awesome every time you hear Harvard. That's pretty awesome. Because the first time you told me that, I didn't believe you. Just because you're such a cool, laid back, like fun guy. Like, this is a Harvard guy. It's like, well, and he is. So, Roberto, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
just in case for listeners who hadn't heard the episode in the past. Then we'll kind of move forward.
Sure. I'm a clinical instructor in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a private practice in a suburb of Boston, Lexington, Massachusetts, and I specialize in the treatment of all ages, children, adolescents, adults with ADHD. I also specialize in the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, body dysmorphic disorder. I also specialize in working with boys and men with all various types of eating disorders and body image disorders, and co-wrote a book years ago called The Adonis Complex that looks at all of those issues. And I have ADHD myself, so I come from a very personal place with it and have it all in my family tree. And also work doing a lot of work in the field of learning disabilities and dyslexia awareness. And so it's great to be here. I really enjoyed the first time we talked about sleep. So I'm always happy to be here.
Roberto, usually when I think of people who talk about have as number of specialties as you just said that you have, I usually think, right. But in conversations that we have had, I can attest to that Roberto has true specialties in all of these areas. And I know that you're a voracious learner, and just you look at these different clinical areas in real depth, and I think you do come from that both personal experience with it, but it's always a joy hearing you at different conferences and just the conversations that we have. So in our last episode, we talked about sleep,
Yes.
which is an issue that both of us kind of had issue with. How's your sleep been, by the way?
It's been pretty good, actually,
good.
for the most part. Yeah. It was a little rocky towards the middle to end of June, just with school ending, and my schedule kind of gets all flummoxed a little bit, but it's actually
Flummoxed?
Yeah, I love that word. It's one of my favorite words.
Flummoxed.
Flummoxed.
What is that?
It's like you're all like discombobulated and like,
like verklempt, or no, it's like more of like flummoxed.
I like verklempt too. That's actually a good one. Or betutzt, if you've ever heard of betutzt.
No, what's that one?
I think that's more of like a Yiddish or a faux Yiddish sort of similarly like discombobulated, overwhelmed, but it's good. I love the summer. So summer is my favorite time of year. So Sleep is good.
Now, I know that last week we had scheduled to do this, and then I had to reschedule with you because I forgot to block off my Mondays.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just telling you before I hit record that, so I'm taking Mondays off in July, and I was thinking about it, that you were actually my inspiration for doing that, because you told me that you took like 2 days off during the summer to spend time with your kids. And,
I do.
I definitely have that, I work too much kind of problem. I love what I do, so it's like it's hard to shift away from work. But so Mondays I've been taking off in July to spend more time with my son, and it's been great.
It's awesome.
So thanks for planting that seed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember the first summer that I did that and sort of proposed that to myself, like, why couldn't, because I always took Fridays off for years, throughout the school year, in the summer, just to be able to take my kids to gymnastics class. And, when they were much younger, then when they were both in school full time, I would, maybe do a couple hours on Friday. But in the summer, I thought, everybody's schedule, all my student patients could now see me during the day in the summertime. So I didn't have to be here in the evening as much. And I just loaded up the hours, and I still accommodated everybody's schedule and could spend full days with, my kids at the beach and stuff. So it's great. I mean, it's really the best of both worlds when you love what you do, because I do love coming into work, and I love leaving work to go home to my family. So it's great.
Well, let's talk about eating disorders, and I know that there's an overlap between body image. So where do you want to start on that? Because I know that is one of your areas of specialty, and how that all kind of intersects with ADHD.
Absolutely. I would say, I mean, this is something I feel very passionately about. And for me, coming from the field of eating disorders, which I've been in for 20 years now, doing work on with boys and men in particular, that that intersection really came out of my work working with a lot of men, particularly with binge eating disorder, with bulimia, or men who were just obese, who just had a lot of sort of compulsive eating issues, or would just have a hard time kind of managing their impulse to eat. And it's not a surprise that many of them had undiagnosed ADHD. Some of them would come in with ADHD, but I would say the majority of them had undiagnosed ADHD. And a lot of these men who had been in treatment before were either labeled as treatment resistant, or that they weren't trying hard enough. They weren't doing sort of the cognitive behavioral.
I really don't like that term of treatment resistant.
I hate that term. I really, really do. I mean, I understand it from a psychopharmacological perspective if someone isn't responding to medications, because there isn't a judgmental tone to it. Like your body is treatment resistant to certain medications. Like I might be treatment resistant to certain antibiotics, but when you use it in a sort of more therapeutic term, it can denote the sense that the person isn't trying hard enough, or that they're invested,
or the therapist just isn't using the right approach for that particular client.
Exactly. And what we know certainly with ADHD is if you don't acknowledge the ADHD, that is fundamental. That is absolutely fundamental. So I remember the first CHAD conference I spoke at in 2008 in Anaheim. I felt I wanted to sort of bring this information to, the ADHD community, and thought, like, let's see, like, how do people, and I did a talk about this very issue. And since then, I mean, I speak annually at the CHAD conferences, but I have given that talk many times over the years, and it's become much more of a hot topic. And the good news is that there's a lot more research. I'm involved in a research study right now, a grant with these researchers in Florida looking at obesity. But there's a pretty good literature looking at gastric bypass patients and finding that up to 40% of them have ADHD.
Wow.
And the majority of them have not been diagnosed prior to that. And then in not only that, but those with ADHD are much more likely to gain the weight back after a gastric bypass surgery, which is not an easy thing to do. But if you have a lot of the impulse control issues and everything, that can happen. So I think on a larger scale, and food in general has just become sort of a hot issue in the ADD world in terms of, are there foods that are better for people with ADD? What about sugar? What about carbs? Like all of the sort of nutritional aspects. So I'm interested in all of it, and actually.
And what have you found so far on that?
So let's say if we take something like sugar, this is probably the biggest myth is that sugar causes hyperactivity. And you'll
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, look at all these kids after they have birthday cake. They're all like wild and crazy.
Mm-hmm.
No, the kids are wild and crazy because they're a bunch of kids and a mob mentality and
Mm-hmm.
they're at a bouncy house and you're supposed to be wild and crazy. However, what's fascinating is people with ADHD love sugar, like not only love sugar, but crave it in different ways. But even more interesting, and this was so validating, is that our brains, and I say us because I consider myself part of this, is metabolizes sugar at a slower rate in the brain. Now, what that means is that those of us with ADHD can ingest a lot more sugar before our brains say, whoa, like you need to slow down the sugar. And I
I
can
can
tell
attest
you,
to that a few weeks ago, but we can talk about that maybe later.
yeah, no, I mean, the example I often give is I remember when in the mid 90s, I was in grad school and Dunkin' Donuts had unveiled their Coolatta, the strawberry Coolatas, the fruit Coolatas.
Uh-huh.
And I love slush. I would prefer slush over ice cream
Hmm.
any day. I'm not a huge ice cream fan, but I love
Don't you
slush.
get
Now,
brain freeze?
oh, I don't mind. Every now and then I'll get it. That's okay, but and slush is really just ice and sugar. I mean,
Yeah.
that's at least with ice cream you're getting some calcium. But a strawberry culotte is basically like a big giant slush. And I remember going to class and thinking, oh wow, it's on the wall of Dunkin' Donuts. I'm like, let me get one of these. And I took a sip of it and it was like heavenly. I thought like, oh my gosh, I literally want to feel this way for the rest of my life. And I'm not even exaggerating. It literally felt like a drug. I mean, it is so sweet, but nothing in my brain was saying, ooh, this is too sweet. I slurped this thing down. It was big. And I went to class and I came home and I bought another one
Whoa.
and came home and my wife was home and my brother was actually at my house. And I said, oh my gosh, guys, you have to try this. This is so good. And so my wife, who does not have ADHD, sipped it and her face immediately went into this repulse, like, oh my gosh, like she just sucked a lemon. And she said, Roberto, this is the nastiest, this is the, oh my gosh, like awful thing. Like, you're not going to be able to drink this. And I said, oh, I drank one earlier. This is my second one. She's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is so sweet. But this is in line with, when I started drinking coffee, which was in my early 30s. I never drank coffee before my first child, which tells you something. The running joke was, do you want coffee with your sugar? I mean, I would put tons of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole life I was like I loved to drink soda when I was growing up, even though it was banned in my household. And I used to be so upset, like, why are you we could only drink spring water in my household. And now I'm thanking, my mom and my parents raising me that way, because otherwise I probably would have a pretty significant weight problem. But I would go to my friend's house and drink, soda, and I loved it. I couldn't understand how people. And when I read those studies, it was so validating because I'm like, yes. But what's important with knowledge is I know that I do need to be careful with those kind of things. So I rarely drink soda now. I, I would never get, one of those big culattas, now. And, weight can go up and down. I mean, for people with ADD, if I'm not careful, I easily can put on weight. I'm in a good place now where I'm very watchful and I've lost a lot of weight. And when I go to the gym regularly, I put on muscle very quickly. So, the body image, the eating thing, it's much more of an issue than people think it could be.
So, you also mentioned carbs. Now, I read a couple of years ago, Vince Monastro's work on like food, and he was talking about how carbohydrates in the ADHD brain it requires much more kind of neural energy to break that down. And so, and so I was thinking about this, and my morning routine used to be 3 like large, highly lighted cups of coffee and a bowl of like healthy cereal, like I don't even know what it was, just like a non really sweetened cereal with fruit. And I would fall asleep after that. And when I saw this stuff about, going high protein, low carbs, I tried it and I noticed a difference almost immediately. And I've been making the same protein shake in the morning, really since I discovered that. And so it's like, I know that some people will say, well, the science is kind of iffy on that. But I think when it comes down to it, it's like, try it. If it works, do it. If not, don't.
Absolutely. And there are a number. So sugar is one thing. Protein is, so sugar would be the thing that really people with ADHD have to be careful about. And simple carbs is sugar. I mean, white bread is basically sugar in the body. So that's very important too. When we eat French fries, it's sugar. Protein is the opposite of that. And what studies are showing more is that the ADHD brain really needs protein. And I've always known this since I was 6 years old, that I get I get irritable if I don't have enough protein. Like, it's almost like I know that my body really, really needs it. So I love eggs. I love almonds. Although it took me a while to get into almonds. I didn't always like nuts. Peanut butter and, just even meat. And I was a vegetarian for many years when I was younger. And that actually did not work out well for me. And, what ended up happening is
because you would drink a gallon of this Coolatta and,
I would honestly, that's what would happen. I would basically have more sugar, but I ate tons of carbohydrates, probably to just compensate, and put on a tremendous amount, like for me, a lot of weight. I mean, and I realized this isn't working, for me. It works for some people and that's great. But I have to eat meat. Like, I need, my protein.
I recently discovered, my brother-in-law told me about, I was telling him what I put in my protein shake, and I put peanut butter in my protein shake. He's like, well, have you tried peanut butter powder? I was like, what? It's like, it's all like the good protein and like nothing else. It's like 85% less fat, like none of the sugar. It's awesome. So I recently replaced regular peanut butter with peanut butter powder in my protein shakes. I don't even notice the difference. It's awesome.
And, with food in general, what's so problematic about our culture is that we're a diet obsessed culture. Yes. And that's actually one of the contributing factors to obesity in this country is dieting, strangely enough. We have our food portions but the reason that dieting is that we're in this mentality that we're going to deprive ourselves of certain foods, or we dichotomize foods as good foods and bad foods. And then if we have a bad food and we think, I've gone off the diet, and then we end up eating more and more and more of the bad foods. And if you lose a lot of weight too quickly, your body is going to want to rebound and put that weight back on plus some. So for healthy weight loss, if you are overweight and you want healthy weight loss, for a male, it's an average of 2 pounds a week, really no more. For women, 1 pound a week. So if you're looking to lose 50 pounds, for a man, at minimum, give yourself 6 months. And that's if you're really on top of it. And for a woman, it's about a year to maintain that weight loss.
And I think in a lot of ways, that's good news, because it's actually it's a lot more doable than trying to do this really fast weight loss. And Robert, I have absolutely done the roller coaster of gaining and losing weight my entire life. I mean, my senior year of high school, I think I definitely was more muscular too, but I tipped the scale at 250. So I was, and after I got that was pre-diagnosis. I think that once I started taking Adderall, in college, after I got my diagnosis, I think what I realized was that I was just mindlessly eating so often, that, the medication, I think, kind of curbed that a bit. But I definitely have fluctuated within a 30-pound range, throughout most of my life, at least my adult life.
Yeah. And I think when people understand that if you put that through an ADHD lens, I know for me that I love food. I love food. Like, I come from a family where we love food. It's very cultural. It's very social. And, people in my family have very healthy, neither of my parents, were overweight. My dad lived until he was 90, and he never lost or, was minus or plus 5 pounds, like his entire life. And we appreciate food in a lot of ways. But I know for me, I call it, I could be on the seafood diet. If I see it, I'm going to eat it.
or the cookies, cake, and candy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are certain foods, like if you put 2 pounds of pasta in front of me. I can eat it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, and I was a kid who I was actually very, very thin as a kid. I was a very thin kid, and you would be amazed at how much food I could put down. I mean, I would go to birthday parties, and I mean, I remember the parents would be in amazement at the amount of food that they'd be like, where is this going? And, when you're younger, I, was very active, running around all the time. I think the hyperactivity in my case really helped, but
Mm-hmm.
I also have genetics that are, I think, good genetics in that realm, like good meaning like fast metabolism. But I am in a job now where I'm sitting all day, and so I'm not as active in that
Mm-hmm.
regard. And as you get older, your metabolism starts getting a little slower. So I noticed my 20s that the weight would start to sort of fluctuate and see it. And I'm aware now of this notion of like, I don't want to not eat if I like a certain food, I'm going to eat it. And so the key is all really about moderation. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I want a cookie, I will take a cookie. But I know, like, say, one of my downfalls is like Oreo cookies. I love Oreo cookies.
Dunked in milk or without not being dunked in milk?
I could do it all. I could dunk it in milk. I used to like to mash it in ice cream.
Ooh.
I could eat it. And I like the double stuff. there's a mega stuff one that other people find repulsive.
What was that one that was like huge and like, is that the mega stuffed, or wasn't there like the big one, or do you remember what I'm talking about? There was like, you can get it in like a package of one, and it's like huge.
Oh, that one I don't know. I don't know if I've ever seen that one. That's interesting. The mega stuff is the filling. It's almost like a double stuff and like a single, but in one. And I know better. Like, I can't have a package of Oreos in my house. Right. Seriously, I will. And the packaging, the ease of just opening the flap, and I can't. It will be gone. But what I'll do is I'll buy the package of 6 in a supermarket, and if I'm in the mood, for them, and I'll have them, because the deprivation, especially for people with ADHD, we are pleasure focused.
Yes, we are.
So, and there is, I know for myself, for a lot of people with ADHD, I think because there is something very sort of out of the box about a lot of the ways that people with ADHD might think and orient themselves in the environment. I know for myself that's true, that there is this very kind of rebellious sort of oppositional part of me that never responded very well to people kind of saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. So if I'm saying that to myself, like, oh, you can't eat that, I'm almost going to rebel against myself and just eat the whole package, and just, so I don't ever deprive myself of those things. It's just a matter of, like, you use the word mindless, which is so important. And, Mark Burton and Mark Burton is a developmental pediatrician in New York. He and I presented at the last CHAD conference, where he brought in his mindfulness work, and I talked about eating and really combining that. And that's really the key, is just being mindful of what you're eating.
So what would that look like? Talk to us a little bit about that. Like, so someone who's mindfully eating.
Absolutely. I think it's really paying attention, almost like, imagine as if you had to report to somebody. If somebody asked you, tell me about what you eat, how much you eat, when you eat, are you eating when you're hungry? Are you eating when you're stressed? Almost as if you have to give like a full report on your eating dynamic. And when I meet with people, actually, when I meet with anybody, regardless of their diagnosis, in the intake, I always ask them, like, how many hours a night do you sleep? What are those hours? And I always ask about their dieting, like their eating. Do you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner? When do you eat those meals? How much do you eat? So even people lots of people have problems with healthy, mindful eating, even if they don't have an eating disorder or a weight issue. So it's really being aware of, what am I eating, and is what I'm eating sustaining me? Like, almost kind of checking in with yourself at the end of the day. And I tell people with ADD at the beginning, like anything else, it is effortful. It's a lot of work at the beginning, but then it really becomes a routine. So there are certain products that I buy, for example, like cereals that I buy, that I know I won't be hungry for like 2 to 3 hours after I eat it, because it's so fibrous. It has so much fiber and protein in it, and it really works for me. Whereas I know other cereals,
Lucky Charms.
Yeah, that would be like I'd eat it and then you can eat a whole box
Oh
of
my
them.
gosh.
Oh my gosh. It's just and and now I'm thinking, my mom now and thanks my dad, like we never could have those kind of cereals in the house growing up. And now I'm in a house, I'm a parent of 2 kids, and I remember as a kid saying, "Oh, when I'm a dad, my kids are gonna eat Lucky Charms and Boo Berry and all that." And what am I? I'm a dad who does not allow those kind of cereals because, I have a son with ADD, and my daughter's, not that far. She's somewhere, in there as well. And we all operate that way. So it's being very aware and then being very conscious of even how you're eating. People with ADD tend to be fast eaters. They tend to have like the fork ready to go in their mouth, even as they're chewing their food, just to, almost like to shove it like a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And even like very simple techniques, like putting your fork down or your spoon down until you chew and swallow. Like this is how my dad, who did not have ADHD, and he lived to be 90, very healthy until 4 months before he died. And he was the perfect example of a mindful eater, because family dinners growing up, he would put food in his mouth, put the fork down, chew, swallow. He might talk a little bit and then pick up. And whereas my mom, who's definitely the one with ADHD, would eat her food and then would be like, get up for any reason to serve anyone anything. And she's a mom in every way, but a lot of it was also just she couldn't sit still like long enough to she's been to a restaurant. I think twice I've been to a restaurant with my mother. She will only go to a restaurant if it's Chinese food because she can't cook Chinese food, she said, and if it's a buffet. But she just
buffets are dangerous.
Oh, buffets are horrid. I mean, the first time and this is again mindful eating. I'm glad you brought that up, because the first time I went to a buffet was one of these hometown buffet. I don't know what you have in Chicago, but in Boston, it's like, you pay $14.95, all you can eat. And I was in college at the time. I think I was in college or right out of college. And I was like, great. And I really did not, it wasn't like a binge eating thing. It was taking a little bit of this, a little bit of this, but there are 100 things that you can take
100 little bits of things.
A little 100 little bits. And I'm not even kidding you, Eric. By the time I was done, because I would get a plate and I'd be like, ooh, food. Oh, I get more. And when we all left, it was with a bunch of friends of mine, my wife, I couldn't get out of the booth because I literally felt like the food was like up here and I was going to throw up.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was like, and again, it's one of those things that I was actually in very good shape at the time. And, people are like, oh my gosh, like how, like they couldn't believe how much I could consume. And I couldn't either. And that was like the first time I really remember thinking like, wow, I should probably keep an eye on this, because this could get bad, like if I don't really pay attention to it. So I can go to buffets. Like when we go to the CHAD conferences, there are buffets, but I am very careful. And what I tell people with ADD, just like I tell people who are addicts, people who, and I have a very addictive personality with certain things, is the reality is lots of people don't have to think twice. They go to a buffet, they get what they want, they eat, whatever. Many people with ADD do. We have to have a plan. We have to be effortful, because the alternative is, either a massive weight gain or just not even really enjoying your food. Like I find when I'm more mindfully eating, when I eat slower, I can taste the flavor of the food better. I can smell the aromas of it better.
And I know that one approach to mindful eating is to truly like eat like you don't typically eat. It's like, notice how, if you're using a fork, notice how the food feels as you're puncturing it with the fork. Notice how it first feels when it's touching your lips before even putting it in your mouth. Put that food in your mouth without chewing it. Just let it kind of, let your mouth kind of salivate around the food, and really pay attention to all the sensory sensation around it. Take that first bite exceptionally slowly. Try to notice everything you can about
it.
And it's
definitely,
and I think it actually, I think, creates more enjoyment of that food.
Oh, it absolutely does,
because it sort of gives us more stuff to kind of wrap our brain around, which is something that we tend to want to do anyways.
Exactly. I mean, that's the irony, isn't it? Is that, we tend to eat fast, almost like we're trying to give our brain the stimulation. But everything you said, that when we now are smelling the food, when we're looking at it, when I was eating, my wife made pork chops last night. And before, a good example of mindful eating, like I, put the fork in it and I noticed the juices, came, and that made me like, ooh, like this is a real, like juicy, like, my wife's a good cook. And I remember putting the piece in my mouth and consciously saying, let me not like just chew this and swallow it quickly, because this is a good, juicy little piece of pork I'm about to put in my mouth. And it sounds kind of hokey to people, just to do this. And I'm not saying every meal I'm doing this. I mean, there are certain meals I just have to eat and get by and, get back to work or whatever. But even if we're enabling ourselves to do this for, one of the 3 meals or however many you have in a day, to be very conscious. The other thing too is that when we're more slow like that in terms of our eating, we will eat less over time. And it's again and there's a great book. I forget. I think it's called Mindless Eating. I'll send you an email, and when you post
okay, we'll post it on the show notes.
It's a great book by this researcher who he has a food lab, and all he does is study sort of how people eat. And one of the things that, is not a rocket science, but that people do consume more calories the faster they eat. But if you're given, let's say, a smaller amount of pasta in a small bowl, that's all that you have, you're probably more likely to eat that slower, to enjoy it. And you'll be satisfied with it. You'll be like, that was good. But if you were given quadruple the amount in a big bowl, you were told you can only eat half of it, you might have the feeling, people with ADD, now he doesn't specifically talk about people with ADD, but anecdotally, I know for people with ADD would say, oh, I'm still hungry. Like I only had half of it, because we're thinking, oh, I'm deprived of this other half. Now, what I do, I don't go out to eat as much as I used to. But when I do, the portions are so big, sometimes I tell them to wrap up half of it.
That's
and
smart,
not even show it.
Yes.
Because if I see it, even if I know it's a lot, and I'll say, oh, I could save that for lunch. If it's in front of me, it is so difficult to remember, like, I'm actually not hungry right now. Like it's almost like that pleasure centered kind of.
It's interesting. So I had I've always had, I guess probably some irritable bowel syndrome stuff. I think it's runs in my family. My sisters, my grandma, my grandfather, like all have this issue. And so on Father's Day, I love brunch. It's one of my favorite foods. But I was very so we had brunch and then we were going to have dinner at my in-laws. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to have one plate. I was really kind of watching what I was eating, and I was feeling good about that. And then so I was at my parents', and they have a pool kind of in their community complex. And so we're at the pool, and my mom brings the leftover mandel bread to the pool. And it was just like, when you have those moments where you're kind of like watching your own thoughts and you're like, what am I doing? I kept eating mandel bread. I'm like, Eric, stop. And I just kept eating it. Yeah. So I was like, I didn't even want to think about how much I ate. Then I go to my in-laws for dinner. And as I'm walking in, I'm thinking, I don't really need to eat probably anything. I'll just have a little bit of something, a sandwich and a half later, and then Roberto, I'm telling you, I had what I would say the worst stomachache I ever had in my entire life. And, it's like, I was even aware that I needed to monitor it, and like I didn't. And that's where it's like, if you want to understand ADHD, it's like, look at those kinds of issues. It's like, I'm aware of it, and it's like my brakes just aren't working. And I'm just hoping the pain will stay with me a little bit to help stay in the memory of, do I really want to eat this? Support for this podcast comes from Audible. For a free audiobook download, go to erictivers.com/audible for a link for that free download and for some hand-picked recommendations. Go to erictivers.com/audible for your free audiobook download. I'm planning ahead, and you can too. This fall's ADHD Rewired Coaching and Accountability Group begins September 14th, 2015. Besides from the benefit of securing your spot, I've set it up so you can start making payments now, and you could spread the cost over 6 months, making it affordable on almost any budget. To take advantage of this 6-month payment option, you do have to sign up by July 31st. Then you could pay over 5 months, then 4 months. The price will go up September 1st. And we already had one person sign up, which is pretty awesome. Many of you were interested in this summer's session, but told me you needed to wait until the fall. If you already know now that you want to join the next session, don't wait. Go now to coachingrewired.com to schedule your free consultation. That's coachingrewired.com, and prepare to get your ADHD rewired. If you want to understand ADHD, it's like, look at those kinds of issues. It's like, I'm aware of it, and it's like my brakes just aren't working. And I'm just hoping the pain will stay with me a little bit to help stay in the memory of, do I really want to eat this? The last month is actually, it's helped and actually motivated me I bought a new piece of exercise equipment. And have you ever seen these ellipticos?
No, I haven't seen those.
So it's like an elliptical, but it's like a bike. So it's like you're out, it has wheel. I mean, it's awesome. Oh, it's so much fun. It's hard. I've had really good workouts with it. So I've been looking at one of these for like, probably a couple of years. My uncle has one, and he has had back issues. And so, and I've had back issues. So, and I've looked at them. I'm like, oh, the price point kind of put me out of the market for it. I mean, they're not cheap. But anyways, I'm with my son, and he's with me on my bike on the trailer. And so I'm facing one way, crossing the street, and I see somebody on an elliptico. And I was like, oh my God, I have to catch up to this person. And I catch her like stopped. She's like waiting to cross the street. And so I go really quickly across the street, and I'm like, so I started talking with her, and I said, I know this might sound crazy. Can I try your elliptico?
That's awesome.
So I'm there, my son's on the trailer. He's going to be 4. And, it's sort of one of these like almost cult things. It's like, because it's sort of this weird looking thing and it totally turns heads. It's like you want to, it creates this like desire to create a sense of community. So she was like, yeah, absolutely. And, so I took a really quick ride. So my son can still see me. So I basically left my son with a total stranger. She can still see, he can still see me. Right. But so I went on this really quick, 100-foot just test. I just wanted to feel what it was like. I went and then later, that day or the next day, I found a place that sells them, and did an actual half an hour test ride on it, and I bought one that weekend. It was awesome. Great. It was awesome.
I love the elliptical. I think that, and in terms of healthy weight loss and everything, is when we talk about exercise, that's also a huge, exercise is obviously very beneficial for anybody, but for people with ADHD in particular, that it helps not only with just weight issues and things like that, but with concentration, with attention, with all of the executive functions. Just think of them as getting like polished when you exercise. There is a lot of brain research that looks at something called the human gonadotropic factor, which actually stimulates neuronal growth and sort of white matter in the brain, which helps make those connections. So the key is that people have, again, these very prescribed sense of like, okay, I have to go to the gym 3 times a week, or I have to do, no. Especially for people with ADD, find something you like to do and just do it. If it's this elliptico, if it's dancing, if it's whatever it is, if you're moving, that's going to be good. However, I do tell people, the truth is that, and I think unfortunately this is promoted, even with our, I can get political about this, like in terms of, how our government sort of looks at it, is that the reality is you can undo a 1-hour workout with a single cupcake. And so watching what you eat, if we're talking about healthy weight, the food is absolutely primary, because the reality is that it's really unfathomable to I would say most of us, as to how much calories and fat are in certain foods, particularly in restaurants. If you go to restaurants, check out the website of nutritional information if they have it, and honestly be prepared, because you're going to be horrified by how much fat is in some of these foods that's why they taste so good, in
Mm-hmm.
restaurants. So when I am really in workout mode, what enables me and why the two can go really well together is when you work out more, you hopefully will be a better eater, because you want to say to yourself, I don't want to have done that 1 hour, 2 hour workout in vain and come home and be eating, food that's just going to put the weight on. So it helps you kind of keep that in check. But that's another thing, is just being very aware, because I work with so many clients, ADHD people, with eating issues. And they're like, I don't understand. I go to the gym every day, and they're not binge eating or anything. But when I look at what they're eating, I'm like, unfortunately, that, like, a burger at some of these not even fast food, but like these sort of medium kind of, is unbelievable. I have a cousin of mine who's in the restaurant industry, and he lives in Brazil now, but he was here for many years, and he worked at a very high-end, high-scale steak restaurant, which shall remain nameless, but was very, very high-end in the Massachusetts area. And he said that one of the steaks they put on the grill, they literally put a stick of butter, an entire stick of butter on the steak as it cooks on the grill.
Oh my God.
When you are getting this steak, you're getting a steak that is saturated with a stick worth of butter, which is an incredible amount. And then the vegetables, why do vegetables taste good in restaurants? Because they put tons of butter and salt on them. He said they basically cook it in butter and oils, put lots of salt on it. So you're getting what you think, because a steak overall, a steak could have a good amount of fat, but it has a tremendous amount of protein in it too. So it's actually a good, if you're not eating like tons of it, it's not actually a bad food to be eating. But when you're adding a stick of butter, it is like, wow, be a very educated consumer. That's the other tip I have for many people with ADD. But
do you have a good resource for people for like where to learn about food?
I don't. I really, there's different websites, and in terms of, I think I tell people it's a fun exercise just to go, even if it's a restaurant that that you don't even go to, and just see like the difference even between like, McDonald's and Burger King, they get a lot of, bad raps and everything. And don't get me wrong, like I wouldn't herald it as, the healthiest food. However, restaurants like the Cheesecake Factory and places like that, they put McDonald's to shame. With the amount of fat in some of their food. Like, look in restaurants and see like what is the nutritional information. And sodium is another thing you have to be very careful about. Too much sodium, you have high blood pressure, you have health issues like that. But I think it's important to do what you like to do. So I have a patient recently I'm working with, and he's like, I trying the gym thing. And he's someone who I said, look, like, I know, like, I never liked a treadmill. I call it the road to nowhere. Like, I just feel like I'm like, where am I going?
Right.
Like, and elliptical I can deal with better. I don't know why. I think maybe the motion doesn't make me feel like I'm walking, as much, which I actually like. So I said, you're a more outdoors person. I said, I think you would do better doing outdoor. All he's doing now, and I say all in quotes, is he's jump roping, which is one of the best cardio activities you can do. Jump roping 20 minutes a day outside of his apartment complex. There's this park. And he says, oh my gosh, why haven't I been doing this like all along? And he's getting a really, again, skipping rope is a really, really good cardio activity. So find something that you like to do and, do it.
One of the things that I, will occasionally do is, I have an app on my phone that can tell my heart rate. You put your finger over the lens and the flashlight, and it's amazing to me that I can actually take
amazing.
And so what I'll do is just to periodically see how hard am I actually working out when I'm doing kind of an indoor workout. And, because I often be listening to podcasts or audiobooks, and it's like, oh man, I'm not working out very hard, and so it's like, I need that kind of as a reminder to like, oh, it's like, I really need to step it up if I really want to get that workout. Because I look at, the trifecta of ADHD management: medication, sleep, and exercise. To me, that is, it's like, when I don't exercise in a day, like, I'm much less productive. Even if I don't have a lot of time to exercise, even getting like a 10-minute just like run, go for a quick something, like get my heart rate, jumping jacks, for a
Yep.
few minutes. And sometimes if I'm in between clients, I'll just do a few jumping jacks just to get my heart rate up to
I do
get that
too.
brain.
I do too. Sit ups, jumping jacks. I'll sometimes dance in my office. I mean, I love music and dancing, and literally, I have to move because when you have the kind of job that we have, as stimulating as it is,
Mm-hmm.
your physical body is your physical body. Your body, my body needs to move,
Yes.
and so absolutely, I stretch, even like a simple stretch of like just being very aware of like your muscle tension.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a very important. I mean, when you think about, with, as like you said, with sleep, exercise, and eating, I mean, like, what is more basic, than that in terms of just general health? And I'd like, I'm sure that there are studies that, I mean, we know of the studies, unfortunately, that look at lifespan and longevity in certain people with ADHD that might be shorter due to vehicular accidents and smoking and addiction and those type of things. And let's turn that around. Let's really work at being able to be aware of these things. But
Mm-hmm.
it really, I mean, my mantra is always where it starts with is almost this Buddhist perspective of acceptance. Like, I accept that I have to be aware of these things in a way that I know lots of people just don't. And I know that my body will work with me if I'm treating it well, and it could totally work against me if
Mm-hmm.
I'm not treating it well. And my weight could go up and down very easily. So when I work out and I eat well, I get results fairly quickly. If I'm not eating well, I get
you also get results, but not the ones you're looking for.
Not the results that I want. And as a parent, and I think for all your listeners and viewers who are parents who have ADHD, who likely are going to have a child with ADHD, it's that much more important for me to be a very good eater and a healthy eater, and to model that, to my children, because I don't want them to be struggling with obesity. And when I talk about it too, I'm talking about it from a purely medical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a culture that's also very discriminating to people who aren't size zeros and who are over. And I could do a whole other show just about that. I'm talking about it from a medical perspective. And the reality is children, especially now, are more obese than ever before. And this is the first generation that will not live longer than the previous generation, which is a very sad, depressing statistic. And one of the primary reasons for that is obesity. So as a parent, at those times where, I feel like my impulse control is sort of waxing and waning, that's the thing that is my kids sort of I'll hold on to. And when we go to the beach, it is non-stop, like moving, running, and jumping and burying each other in the sand, and I love it. So it's doing all of those things that are important.
So it sounds like making exercise fun, having that awareness of, okay, this is my tendencies, and just because I have these tendencies doesn't mean that's what my result is going to be.
Exactly. That I don't have to deprive myself. It doesn't mean I have to diet. It means I just have to, I can have the cookie. I was at a cookout this past weekend and I had some of the sweets, but I took a sweet, put it on a small plate, and I exited the room. I didn't socialize in that room because I know if I'm in that room, it's so much easier for me to get another brownie and another brownie. So it's knowing that, if I'm at a restaurant, I try to have my back to, especially if it's a buffet, have my back to the food so I don't have to look at it, so it's things like that, and I'm okay with doing that. It's very important to accept that.
And one of the things that's been helpful for myself and also my wife, who doesn't have food issues, but she'll she describes herself as a highly sensitive person. And so when she does overeat, she's just extraordinarily uncomfortable. So from a sensory perspective, she's miserable when she overeats. So one of the things we typically try to do before we go somewhere where, there's the potential to overeat, is we talk about what's our plan for eating ahead of time. And to me, that's very, very helpful.
Very helpful.
And she'll ask me, and it'll be, a teeny bit annoyed occasionally, but it's totally helpful. She's like, do you want to eat that? And she's doing it because she knows how miserable I will be if I overeat. Cause I've done that so many times.
And that's an important thing, that you and your partner can. It's so important of how do you want support around it. And when I'm working with someone who's in a relationship or even like a child with their parent, it's so important to just have open conversations about that, because for some people, having their spouse say, do you really want that, could be a real source of conflict in a relationship. But if you're giving permission to your partner to say, okay, I want you to ask me that, like, and just say it once, or I need, and just to be very specific, because sometimes people, and I feel, especially for parents I work with many children who have ADHD, who have a lot of impulse control issues around food, and the parents are at their wits' end. Like, first they feel guilty, they feel responsible, they feel like, what do I do? How do I do this? And they don't want this battle, to ensue. And so the first line is, how do we have a negotiation? And some of my child clients will actually say they don't mind when their parents are saying, okay, are you sure you want this? But maybe just being asked once and not, 2 or 3 times, or, it's how to have that. But food is a loaded issue for many, many people. And because, the things with ADHD that are going to get in our way most are the things that we have to do every day. That's why sleep was, when we talked about last time, is one of the hottest topics, like, because we have to sleep, or we're supposed to be sleeping every single day. We have to eat, and and with something even like addiction, I treat many, people who are addicts, either with ADHD or people with bipolar disorder, which is another group of people that I do a lot of work with. And when I worked with people with who have had like issues with drugs and an issue with food, and not in any way to minimize drug addiction, I've had people in my life who have struggled with it. It is an incredible accomplishment to become sober from the use of drugs and alcohol. But I have to tell you, every patient I've worked with who has struggled with an eating disorder and a drug addiction have said, as hard as the drug addiction is to be sober, the eating disorder is so much harder, because you have to eat. There's no absence model. You have to regulate. And when you have ADHD, all the executive functions that come along with meal planning, with even that conversation you and your wife had, to have the foresight to know, oh, I'm about to enter a situation that I could lose my impulse, my impulses could take. Let me pause and think, like, what is my plan? I often, if I'm going, like this past weekend when I went to the cookout, I ate something at home beforehand, like some fruit and some vegetables beforehand, so I didn't go starving. I used to go to these events when I know there's a lot. Yeah. But I would do it totally intentionally. Like, I'm about to go where I know there's a lot of good food and a lot of good eating. I want to be starving. I want to be ravenous so that I get that like stimulation and that sensory experience. And I now don't do that anymore. And the interesting thing is, I don't enjoy the food less. I actually enjoy it more.
Yes.
And so I think part of it is that, kind of going with the name of the show, we have to rewire ourselves, even in terms of our relationship with food. And that's really what it is. It's not about not enjoying food. It's not about no sugar, no carb, no protein, none of that works. Trust me, none of it works. To cut down on certain things, absolutely. But if you're someone, like I'm someone who loves pizza, I will never, like when people like, oh yeah, I'm just, not doing the pizza. That will never be me. Like, I love pizza too much, but do I have to eat 4 slices? No, I don't have to eat 4 slices. I can eat 2 with the salad now, and I can be just as satisfied if I eat those slices slower. So it's just really rewiring the brain and having a different relationship with food.
Roberto, let's end it there, because I have a coaching call in 1 minute. So we're gonna cut the random question around and just give everyone kind of where they can reach you and any final thoughts that you may have.
Absolutely. So I'm probably the last person on earth that doesn't have Facebook or Twitter. So good old fashioned email. And I welcome all emails. It's Roberto, ROBERTO _Olivardia, which is OLI, V as in Victor, ARD as in Daniel, IA, at HMS as in Harry, Mary, Sally, .harvard.edu. And I welcome all emails, and just tell people to to even just take away from this one thing that they can do, and to know that Rome wasn't built in a day. Just take one strategy a week to try to work on.
Roberta, thank you so much. I'll see you at Chad.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of ADHD Rewired. And if you're new to the show, welcome to ADHD Rewired. We are more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. You could see a full outline of this and all other episodes with all the links and other resources mentioned during this interview at ADHDrewired.com. Help support this podcast by checking out my sponsors. I use Zoom video conferencing nearly every day, and so can you. Go free or go pro. But please go to erictivers.com/Zoom so they know that I sent you. And you can get a free audiobook from Audible at erictivers.com/Audible. And next time you shop Amazon, use the Amazon search portal at ADHDrewired.com. A small percentage of your purchase will go to support this show, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. You can also support this podcast by leaving an honest rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher. This really helps other people find this show. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Don't just be a passive listener, be an active member of the ADHD Rewired community. We are on Facebook. You can like our page, but please submit your request to join our free and growing community. And don't forget to check your other inbox, because I screen everybody before they come into our community.
Looking for a coach? If you're still listening at this point and you answered yes, come to my website at ADHDrewired.com and schedule your free 20-minute consultation, or call me at 224-993-9450. Is your school, business, or organization hiring speakers? I provide fun and engaging presentations full of practical solutions that both educate and entertain. Hire me for your next professional development day or corporate training event. Go to ADHDrewired.com/talks. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.